Hello and welcome to Candidates on the Clock Forum, sponsored by the Newton Chamber of Commerce. I'm your host, Lanier Sims, and today we're joined by Incumbent Doreen Carter that is running for Georgia House of Representatives, District 93. Ms. Carter, could you take a couple minutes and tell the citizens a little bit more about yourself?
Absolutely. Good morning.
Good morning.
I want to say thank you for Newton County Chamber and good to see you for hosting this opportunity. So I'm Doreen Carter. I grew up on the east side of Atlanta. My parents, my mom was from Greene County, my dad's from Alabama. Working class family. We came up in a household that believed in service, they believed in education, and they believed in giving back to the community. My dad was a truck driver, so He'd let us ride around with him sometimes, and he drove the church bus. My mom was a teacher's aide. So we grew up with excellent work ethics and valuing education. So as I grew older, being involved in the community and ultimately being elected first to Lithonia City Council and now as a state representative, I understand how important it is to ensure that the working class has a voice. And so, we're raising kids, and then after my husband died, being, a mom, raising three boys, education was important. Again, work ethics, being engaged in a community. But more than anything, in the Georgia General Assembly, serving on the Education Committee has been a great opportunity because that's where we get to fight for what we know every individual in Georgia deserves, and that's an excellent education. So that is something I'm really excited I've had that opportunity to do. And I just look forward to us talking a little bit more about what's going on down here in Newton County.
All right, awesome. So let's jump into a couple questions, and these are questions that were submitted by citizens here in Newton County. So first question, are you willing to support legislation to offer nonpartisan local elections?
Nonpartisan local elections, that's where you're referring to your commissioners, your school board, and
And your
probably
city council.
and city
Yes,
council,
ma'am.
which in most cases, city councils are pretty much nonpartisan. I would say that it would have to be a conversation we'd have to have with residents here in Newton County. There was a big move in the Georgia General Assembly this past session to change a lot of partisan elections to nonpartisans, and I think it got caught up in the politics. What I'm hopeful is that as we connect and communicate and talk, that we'll understand what the needs are here in Newton County, and then we have elected officials that are focused on the need of the residents here and not the politics. And sometimes being partisan sometimes does get caught up in the politics. However, everyone wants something different. So I've always tried to make sure that I'm talking to constituents without saying what Doreen's opinion is. And as someone who served in local, my first elected office in a city council, it was nonpartisan. And it was refreshing because you didn't really have to think about Republican, Democrat, all of that. It was what do the people in the city need? And so I think there is some value there, but at the end of the day, I would want to talk to residents here in Newton County and help and get an understanding of what their values and concerns are before I would support or not support that type of legislation.
Thank you. And that really ties into our next question. Not what you support, but what's your opinion on legislation to remove politics from the redistricting process by using automation or appointed boards to remove partisan interests from the process?
That would be a miracle. That would be like answered prayers. So this past session, this special session after the census was my first redistricting session and going through that process, and it went beyond partisan. It really just it destroyed the communities of interest and local elected officials who had connected with the community, and then the community being taken out of districts where they had built relationships. They knew they had people that was working hard for them, and it was absolutely political and partisan. I would be hopeful that we could create an environment where we didn't do that process through who was had the majority in the House and the Senate, because the parties are now, okay, how can we make sure that we get our people, or how do we make sure that they don't get what they need? So it became the elected choosing who's going to serve versus the people electing who was going to serve. Now, I'll say my district was definitely affected, but the beauty of it, I now have Newton County.
Yes, ma'am.
And so, for me, I look at it as Newton County deserves a good representative. Not to say you don't have any, but the fact that you'll get Doreen Carter and some of the work that I've done would be amazing. But I think we do need to get to the point where we take politics out of redistricting, because just the basics of having the communities of interest, right? Because so now I laugh and say I've got urban, suburban, and rural, which is cool because I like the diversity. But then there's so many different needs, and so how do we ensure that we meet the needs of these communities, and taking the politics out of how we take care of Georgians?
Okay, awesome, thank you. So next question, what is your view on the expansion of Medicare and Medicaid?
I believe that Georgia continues to miss the mark on ensuring that all Georgians have access to affordable health care. We should expand Medicaid. We've seen some different waivers, we've seen some workarounds, but at the end of the day, there's still a lot of Georgians that don't have access to care, and we need to expand Medicaid. I believe that it will also create jobs, and the funding is there, and there is absolutely no reason why we shouldn't put Georgians, every individual Georgian, in front of our partisan politics. And we've got to get to that. I've been saying to people, Georgia, we say we're the number one place to do business, and that's great, right? But we need to be the number one place to live. Right. Georgia keeps being on the bottom of metrics that are important to people that live in Georgia. We should not be at the bottom of infant mortality, right? We should not be at the bottom, meaning when I say the bottom, we're like 49, right? As opposed to being number one. And so it's by expanding Medicaid that gives more people opportunity, again, to access to affordable health care, and then maybe they can get what they need so that we can be a healthier Georgia. And at the end of the day, I think that has to be more important than our partisan politics. And then as we expand Medicaid, we've got to get a Commissioner of Labor who will address legislation around how healthcare in general is the cost, because the cost of insurance in Georgia is ridiculous, and some of it is based on legislation that we can address. So while we're addressing expanding Medicaid, we should also address how do we ensure that every Georgian has affordable health care.
Okay, thank you. I think this ties into our next question, which is, will you support an increase in our state minimum wage?
Yes. I don't even need my whole 2 minutes for that. I don't know if you remember, I was a Democrat nominee for Secretary of State, and that's one of the things that we talked about is back in 2014, we've been talking about this, we have to increase minimum wage here in Georgia. But I also say that if minimum wage isn't increased, although I believe it should, we need a living wage, and honestly, just a minimum of probably like $20 to $30 an hour is where people really need to be able to live comfortably because everything's so expensive. But we also, in looking at minimum wage, as we bring jobs into the area and then provide the technical skills for our residents to be able to have these jobs to have living wages. So it's like we got to work both. So if the state is not willing to raise the minimum wage, then let's raise workers who can work in these fields that actually pay living wages. But we absolutely must raise Georgia's minimum wage. People really don't realize how low it is. Yeah, it's pretty bad.
All right. As you know, Newton County's been in the spotlight for numerous economic development projects. So this is a two-part question. First part is, do you support the new Rivian plant that's being built in Social Circle?
So I do support industry. I think what I'm understanding is maybe not enough communication with the residents that were in that area. So it's always good to bring jobs and bring clean jobs. So I definitely support bringing jobs into the community. I'm concerned about how residents in that area is affected, but at the end of the day, people in Georgia need good jobs, good paying jobs, so that they could live. And so if there's an opportunity to have some conversations to ensure that it's equitable with the residents that are there, and so they won't feel as disenfranchised because it's coming, and then ensuring that the productions of the products being produced over there are not going to be harmful to the community. So in general, I'm definitely a supporter of bringing business to the area and good business, but I am concerned when it comes to the residents and how they feel about that. And I think what we do sometimes in elected office, and then like your judge, we see things sometimes that other people don't, and we think it's good, but we don't always maybe share enough information on the front end and get the feedback so that the community can understand that what we're trying to do is good, even though you may feel a little discomfort in it.
Okay. The second part of that question is, as Rivian is slated to make Social Circle its new headquarters, what do you think needs to be done to prepare your constituents for the Rivian arrival?
Well, we need to make sure that the infrastructure is there, because it's definitely going to bring more traffic. And then we should really work strategically and very consciously to ensure that residents within this area have first bid at some of those jobs. We need to make sure that our residents are trained and prepared, and we need to make sure that it doesn't disrupt that community. Like I said, my parents, mom's side of the family grew up in Greene County, so not too far from your area, so we know Social Circle, and you want to make sure that we're not disturbing some of that natural beauty down there, and ensuring that the infrastructure is in place, ensuring that residents in Newton and the surrounding areas have opportunities to work in those communities if they choose to, and not just some of those entry-level jobs, but some of those upper-level management executive positions. We should really ensure that we have our folk working here, because I think that's one of the things. We bring industry in, but they bring their people. So if you're going to bring industry, and then it brings new tax dollars, but how do we ensure that it's supported all the way around? It's a win-win for the community as well as for the business.
Historically, none of the local delegation lives in Newton County. What can you do to make more attempts for appearances, planning for upcoming legislative sessions, and general presence in the county?
Thank you for that question. So my new district has 3 counties.
Okay.
Now, if I could live in all 3 counties, I would. And I tell you, I have fallen in love with Newton County. So, but as far as connecting with residents, I am present. When we're in session, I think it's very important that I'm communicating with constituents, that they know as legislation is moving, so they can give feedback back to me. Anyone that has my business card has my cell phone number on it. If I'm invited, I'll be there. Especially these virtual meetings, sometimes we have 3 meetings going on at the same time. But one of the things that even just being redistricted into Newton County, I've really been present and engaged. And like I said, if I get the invitation, I'm going to come to the events unless there's a conflict. So I think being present, talking to people, being accessible. So my website is there. Someone want to stay, in contact there. When we're in session, my admin make sure that she's communicating, and like I said, I make sure that you have my cell phone number. So if there's something going in Newton County, I'll also be proactive. When we were in session, there was a piece of legislation that was affecting the tax commissioners. And I actually picked up the phone and called all 3 tax commissioners, even though Newton County wasn't in my district. But I knew that because I've been redistricted here and that legislation was coming, I reached out to the tax commissioner. And what he said to me, he had never been contacted from a legislator before. I said, well, this is what I do.
Wow. Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
Our next question, what is your view on carbon, I guess on legislation for carbon neutral? Would you support a carbon neutral legislation?
I would support legislation that would absolutely begin to reduce our carbon footprint. I love that we're seeing more solar opportunities in Georgia. I believe that there is even more opportunities that we can expand with alternative energy. We see more of the electric cars coming up, and there was some innovation that was being discussed in my small business committee this session about some opportunities that are happening in other states that we could possibly do here in Georgia. But we got to do everything we can to reduce our carbon footprint. And some of that is we got to save some trees. We got to save some trees, and we have to plant some trees.
Yes,
because we have to be more conscious of the environment. And so Newton County has plenty of trees, and I hope that you all are working really hard to sustain that. And I know there's a lot of development going in, and development is good, but we also don't want to do anything that's going to adversely affect our climate. And so I think that as we dialogue and talk and be strategic and plan, we definitely be conscious of how our carbon footprint affects our everyday lives, because it affects our health as well.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Our last question is going to be, I guess, really about your tenure that you've been in office. So if you can tell us one thing that you've accomplished in office that, the question says, one thing that you have accomplished in office that recommends you for re-election.
So I have a few things, but I think education to me is like really important. And if you have a good education, no one can take that from you. Someone can never take your education. So having adequate funding for our public schools are important. So about 3-4 sessions ago, I was very instrumental in our QE, our education funding formula being fully funded, because every year we would get austerity cuts, and I'm an accountant, so I wanted to understand the funding formula, our funding formula, and I wanted to understand the state's budget. And what I was shown was that the state created its budget, and whatever the deficit was, they took it out of the education budget.
Oh, wow.
And then as I started to understand that and understand the formula, serving on the education committee, that was one of the things that I kept bringing up, because we kept getting legislation that was taking money from education. So how are we going to keep taking money out of education when we don't fully fund education? And we started to see that. And then this year, not only did we see education fully funded, but some of the austerity cuts have been supplied again. And so what I've worked on is getting the education funding formula funded. What I want to work on now is we need to update that education formula. And so that alone is huge, because education is one of the biggest line items in the state's budget. But we'll want to ensure that that funding gets to the individual in the seat so that they can get what they need. So that is a huge thing that I've had the opportunity to work on. One of the things I've had an opportunity to work on since I've been in the Georgia General Assembly.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you for, coming in today and being on Candidates on the Clock and answering some of the top questions from our local citizens. At this time, can you close us out with any further information you'd like the voters to know about your campaign?
Absolutely. Again, I'm Doreen Carter, and I'm the state representative seeking re-election in House District 93. I think it would be great if you all could connect with me on social media. I'm very easy to find. Doreen Carter, number 4GA, whether it's my Twitter or my Facebook, and so that we could connect and communicate. My website is doreencarter.com, and connecting with me, but understanding when Doreen Carter is your state representative, you're going to get someone that works, someone is conscientious about the working community, and someone is conscientious about business. I think I shared with you, you may know I'm a former chamber president, so industry is important to me, workers are important to me, children are important to me, and our community at large. And I think what sets me apart when it comes to serving in the Georgia General Assembly, I can connect at every level, and I can have conversations with the richest, the poorest, whatever nationality, because at the end of the day, it's about serving and serving the community. And I'll finish as I started. I grew up in a house with a working class family, and so working has never been something that I shied away from. I've been working since I was 14 years old. And so I continue to work. I continue to work in my community, and I continue to serve those who need help. And so I want to be that person to continue to serve. And now Newton County residents down at the Georgia General Assembly, because having a strong voice, someone is not shy, someone who would stand up and stick up for you. And if you go back and look at this last session, you'll see that Doreen Carter was standing up for Georgians in this last session. And I want to do that for Newton County.
Thank you.
Thank you.